Good afternoon, everybody. Wanted to thank you all for joining us today. It looks like we have some people signed in, but we're still waiting on a few. So we're just going to give it another minute or two and then we'll get started. Okay. So it looks like we got a few more people in, so we'll let the others join us as we move forward here. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Mike from Comtech Systems. We also have Mel helping us as well with questions, and you'll hear him provide some comment and work with your questions throughout the presentation. Please feel free to ask them using the questions tab in the meeting program. We'll address them if they're relevant right at the time, or we may hold some of them towards the end, but feel free to ask as soon as you come up with something. We also have our special guest speaker from Potomac Pediatrics with us, Jenna Vallejo. I'll be introducing her in a little more detail once we get a little farther down the presentation. All right. So just a little bit about Comtech for those who aren't familiar. We're a local managed service provider. We've been in the DC metro area for 35 years, and I actually think we are at our 35-year anniversary this month, if I remember correctly. So we started originally as a phone company providing voice services, but we've since morphed into a managed service provider and IT company. So we offer 24/7 IT management and support for businesses. We manage 365 and Teams infrastructures. We also provide cloud workspace and cloud infrastructure with Azure, partnering with Microsoft. And that could be take lots of different forms for lots of different companies, but we specialize in the infrastructure so we can help your business with whatever you might need. We provide network security and security training, so that's not only the hardware, firewalls, procedures, etc., for your network, but we also can help train your employees to take that extra step against, making sure people are aware of what a phishing attack might look like, the proper password procedure for your company, and all of those extras that everyone needs to be aware of nowadays. As I mentioned at the beginning, we provide business voice, and we also provide wireless coverage for businesses as well. We're also a member of TAG. That is a industry organization that's got about 300 members in it, and it's countrywide, full of similar organizations to ones like ourselves, small businesses that are in the technology industry. And we use those, one, for industry and buying power, so we can get the best technology at the best price for our customers, and also for help with procedures and new technology, and help geographically. So if your company has a local office and might have a remote office as well, just because we're a small business doesn't mean we don't have the resources to take care of you wherever you might be in the country. So that's always been a big help for us. So with everything that's been going on this year, obviously COVID has been increasing overall, not just hospital visits, but overall has been increasing the number of medical practice visits this year, increasing the amount of associated records. There's new procedures, etc. We were trying to figure out a way to help, because we've been concentrating on remote work as a technology company, but we also have quite a few medical practices that are that we work with, and we want to try to do everything that we can, especially in this industry this year with everything that's going on. So what we decided to do was to work more closely with some of our other vendors and work on our own procedures and develop essentially a HIPAA consultation practice, so to speak. So we can work with businesses and help them make sure that they are HIPAA compliant where they need to be. They have all the bits and pieces that we need to make sure that they're doing the best they can in terms of adhering to the HIPAA guidelines. We've known that this was something that we could kind of help with because we are so being involved in the technology for so many different medical practices. We see those, those things that are done well, those things that are commonly missed in a practice. So we thought it was a good place to bring all that knowledge together and help deliver it to you guys in a complete package, so to speak. So just a little bit of statistics to kind of back up what we found. Obviously, these are pretty simple statistics, but 95% of healthcare organizations, I would really think that's 100%. Everyone has internet connectivity, of course. You need it nowadays to run a business. But then there are some other, additional statistics that are a little more striking. 25% of the surveyed practices don't have a firewall. They have just a, cable modem or whatever was provided, and they have nothing physically protecting their network. That's only one piece of it, but it's a big glaring, I guess, a glaring thing to have missing from your network security. That's kind of the linchpin for your technical and even some of your administrative security safeguards that you have there. 24% have security awareness programs, which is great. That's what you want to do, but we'd really like to see that much higher. It's just like any other training. If it's an important subject, it's something that you have to be constantly reminding your employees, not only because of turnover, but just to make sure that everyone's keeping up to date with the latest procedures. And then the last stat there on the right, 71% have computerized patient information. I think that stat might be a little low because, as we all know, electronic medical records are the de facto standard now. And with that, there's a lot of things that really need to be tightened down on the network, on individual PCs. There's lots of things that we'll get into later in the presentation that you want to look out for. So right now I want to introduce Jenna. She's the COO and practice admin of Potomac Pediatrics, a local practice here that we've been working with for several years. She was featured on Washington Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list recently. And since she's been working with the practice, has helped it grow by 150% over the last 8 years. So it's been really exciting working with them, seeing this growth and helping them, meet their needs technology-wise and other as we've worked together. So with that, I will hand it off to you, Jenna.
All right, awesome. Hi, guys. I'm Jenna. Thank you so much, Mike, for inviting me to speak with you and talk to some of the other practices about what I've experienced. And I want to start today actually with a story that I think is going to resonate with most medical practices and kind of shed some light on why we decided to do a full HIPAA compliance audit with Comtech. And so early last year in 2019, we had a medical records clerk who was burning the patient's electronic medical record onto a CD, as she has done, hundreds of times before. She's working really fast and she's doing other things. She's working on multiple patient charts. As you can imagine where the story is going, she sends the wrong CD to the wrong patient. The patient opens it up. The mom calls, because we're in peds, the mom calls, the mom's furious that she has somebody else's chart and where's her child's chart. So, of course, she sent the record to both the wrong people. We managed the situation. We got the CD back. We apologized for what happened. We corrected the mistakes. We got both CDs back. And both people asserted, that they hadn't made any additional copies or printed anything off. And I mean, in reality, of course, we believe that these are PEDS records with growth charts and vaccines. There's nothing really critical in them, but it's still patient privacy. 3 months later, I get a letter from the Health and Human Services Department that a formal complaint had been filed against us. Prior to that, it's not that I never knew who the HIPAA police were, but I never really thought about it. Like, I never thought, like, where do I go if I want to talk to the HIPAA police? And doesn't matter because they found me. And so they ended up doing this full investigation. They talked to both parents. They talked to me. They talked to the staff member. And they asked so many questions that I wasn't prepared for and had to like really think about. They were asking me about my security and privacy officer, which I'm like, okay, I guess that's my HIPAA officer, so that should be me. That's me. And then they asked about things that had nothing to do with the medical records, mishap that happened. I had to have a fully documented HIPAA investigation form, and there were multiple steps in that. And I'm like, this is not things I had no idea about. I've known a lot of things. We wrote it up, but we didn't have a whole formal process for identifying the issue, the steps taken, the reconciliation, a follow-up. There are actually a lot of steps in a HIPAA breach that you as a practice need to know. And I didn't self-report it because why would I self-report it? We handled the matter. We talked to both parents. We didn't keep it a secret from the parents. But then there are measures at which you're supposed to report to the state, and it's not always great if it gets reported on you. And I know that most medical practices are not really tattling on themselves, and that's understandable. However, we go through this entire process, and I'm learning all the way. I literally must have spent at least 2 weeks investigating HIPAA laws. I mean, like really getting to the detail of like reading the laws, finding forms and things that I needed to have and then customizing them to our practice, educating the staff. But in this process, they started asking me, well, what kind of HIPAA training do you do? And I'm like, well, we have staff meetings, and we always talk about something HIPAA related, right? There's always something HIPAA related to talk about. And they're like, great, show me your signed documentation that the employees attended those meetings. And I didn't have that because I never had the staff sign off on all of these different things. And so I had meeting agendas. I keep every meeting agenda. So I had copies to provide some kind of evidence that these are things we plan out and we talk about in different ways. What got me really going was that I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable about a lot of HIPAA things, and I understand obviously the very essence of it, and it is so important to me. And there was more I didn't know than I actually did know. And it started tapping into different areas and aspects of our practice that really made me question what we were doing and how we were doing it, and are some of the things that we're doing, even though they seem okay, they feel okay, we feel like we're checking the right boxes, is there something in there that might not be okay? And so it caused me to take a huge pause and step back, because a HIPAA investigation is actually very, very scary when you go through it, because realistically they can shut you down. They can fine you tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're found guilty, a patient can sue you. So there are a lot of reasons that you want to really pay attention to HIPAA, even if you have so many other things to do. And that really kind of was where I felt, as you saw, we've grown 150%. Man, there's always something to do. And we talk about HIPAA, but never has it been like a top priority for me to like focus on different security measures and policies and protocols that we have in the practice, and training and retraining. It's always been, an item on the back burner that I'd like to do at some point, until I was forced to pause and say, okay, actually, now this is moving to the top of the list. And realistically, it should have moved to the top of the list before it ever got to that point. And maybe I wouldn't have been able to prevent that one error that employee made, but the measures that I have in place now actually do prevent it. However, I would have I would have been in a much better position when I was going through the investigation and probably had a lot less anxiety about it had I had that stuff in place. In the end, it turned out okay. We got this pass, and it was all fine, except for the months of anxiety, because the process goes for months that I had, and every time I'd get a phone call or an email from the state, I'm on pins and needles, like, okay, what's going to happen? All waiting to see what type of punishment we're going to get. So that's what made me say, whoa, let's take a step back, let's take a look at this, and then really, when Comtech started this process of doing a HIPAA audit, like, yep, absolutely, I'm going to do it. And frankly, even for a measure of being able to check a box that I am annually trying to be better. I'm doing audits. I'm having somebody else look. I'm having somebody else give me guidance. I'm having somebody else ask me tough questions. Is helpful if I were to ever have another incident again, because I can prove that I'm actively trying to always be better when it comes to patient privacy. And so that is that's sort of how we kind of came together in this whole, HIPAA audit.
Yeah, so you were saying, and that's a good point, that at the end there, kind of the documentation of what you did have was, part of the saving grace. And that, I think, was the first point that we hit on, was, what do we have documented? What are all the bits and pieces? I think that was the first topic that we talked about when we started the process.
Right, and our documentation at the time was very, like, all over the place, right? Like, we wrote something up kind of on a Word document, the employee signed it, we signed it, we got stuff back from the parents, they signed something, but we didn't have like a formal process, right? If I wasn't in the office and that happened, nobody would have known what to do with it. They would have been calling me trying to figure it out. Now I have a full process laid out. Someone can pull the guide, follow the steps, and everybody's involved, right? Like, so it's not just if there's a red flag that happens, or somebody identifies even a potential HIPAA violation. I encourage my employees to fill out a form that we have in the office, like a HIPAA complaint form, and the first person to identify fills out that form and then turns it into the HIPAA privacy officer, who can then investigate further. I also learned in this that I should not be the HIPAA privacy officer, that somebody else that is, one of my providers is a HIPAA privacy officer, but if everybody in management and the top leader is the HIPAA privacy officer, it could seem that maybe you would have a reason to hide a HIPAA violation. So I have somebody else in the practice that is the HIPAA privacy officer. Frankly, that saves me time, but it's also a really good measure to say that we have good checks and balances in our office, because we are always trying to do the right thing. And having a written up process now that guides each step of the way, keeps us consistent, keeps the documentation consistent, and ensures that for any issue that could or does rise up, that we're fully investigating it, even if it comes out that no, something was not a HIPAA violation. The act of investigation, the act of trying and being able to demonstrate that you are invested in protecting patient privacy is frankly often enough to save you from heavy fines if you were to make a violation.
Yeah, and as we've talked about this, and it's like you said, it is making your best effort, but always making progress. Because we would describe most of and Jen, I don't know if you would describe it the same way, as everyone has the best intentions, but it doesn't mean the process is there.
Yeah, I would say that. And I mean, I've worked in, more than one medical office, and I can say for sure that every office has HIPAA violations in some way, shape, or form. Some are small, some might be a little bit bigger, some may have just not been caught, but they exist because your entire system is humans working, and humans we make mistakes, and the employees make mistakes. even when they're well intended. So it's hard to believe that there's any office out there that doesn't have some violation that happens at some point in time, whether it's big or small. But that's why we should be constantly trying to improve in this process, but really have a system in place to address it.
Yeah. So speaking of some of the processes, so we, as we were talking, I know we talked about the training and everything involved in your onboarding process, but the termination process needed work. And so what could you run through a little bit of what you do in the onboarding?
Yeah. So when we onboard a new employee, first off, we have this great onboarding guide for each position in the office that helps with our training protocols. But it also gives us a checklist, like make sure you introduce them to people. Do they need a data watch or an access card? Okay. Do they need a cloud account, an ECW account? Like literally breaks down every possible step so that day one the employee comes in and everything down to their workstation is set up and ready for them. And then we don't do as good in termination. So our onboarding process, and we're with them so much in the first, month of someone being here that we're actively, constantly engaged, making things are working for them, making sure they have proper access, and updating access if things don't actually work correctly or if something's missing. So we have a lot of opportunity in the onboarding process to make sure that the employee has everything that they need and that the safeguards are in place so that our front desk has front desk privileges, our nurses have nursing privileges. But in our termination process, it's not that way. I mean, sometimes, as most of you know too, you have advance notice that somebody is leaving, and sometimes it kind of just happens, whether by their choice or yours. And that termination process is really where we can do better. There are a couple things that we always terminate right away, simply because we've learned the hard way. So we use something called Slack, so we terminate that right away. And for another quick fun but not fun story for us, we had an employee once. We used to send weekly emails to everybody's personal email on Sundays, kind of like a let's get together, let's have a great week, here are the updates, like very well-intended email, until we had one disgruntled employee who, on her way out the door, sent really the nastiest 5-page email that she could possibly send to the entire staff. And that quickly interrupted the day, became a talking point, right? I couldn't do anything about it. It was literally in everybody's email. So we've learned that we're not going to send things to everybody on the staff's personal email anymore. And we're going to utilize a tool that helps us communicate really well and can be cut off instantly. So we use Slack for that. And so we cut things like that off right away. But then oftentimes we get the data watch cards back. Sometimes that doesn't happen because sometimes people ghost you. And then we have to remember to, go in and cut off that access. We always cut off the EMR access. But then there are other things like our cloud access that we have to have, that we reach out to contact to cut off. There are other emails, so we have group emails for our general mailbox, and a lot of our reception team manage that email, and they have the password for it. But do I change it every single time? Nope, I sure don't. And that's an area that I need to improve on. And the reality is it's going to be a big pain in the butt for me to change it every time and then get everybody's systems back updated and having to walk through the technologically challenged through the same steps 10 times. So right, there's a pain point there. So there are areas in which we could really, really improve on our offboarding process. I feel like our onboarding process just is, it's on point. But our offboarding process, if we know that somebody's leaving, we do a better job than if somebody abruptly leaves.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, and as you work on that, maybe the next thing is the termination checklist, just like you have for the other one. Because again, even if you have the checklist and you probably the act of just having the checklist, starting to fill it out, will get those couple items dealt with much more quickly because they're in the back of, either the privacy or the security officer's mind, looking at it. So, and at least also to be able to say, here's what we're supposed to do exactly, if there is another audit. So
if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, this is Mel again, but it's something that I have seen quite a few organizations ask for our assistance from a technical point of view with creating a termination checklist. It's definitely becoming a tool that a lot of people are finding a lot of success in. Basically, the thought process is the first page of an employee file has that onboarding checklist, and the last page has that termination checklist, and it really helps close the door and make sure you've hit everything of importance.
Yeah, definitely. So, and then Jenna, I know you talked about you do currently have HIPAA training for the users, but I think we had talked about ways that we can improve it, or I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in the office we do group HIPAA training and we do individualized HIPAA training. So if a newer employee gets a lot of stuff right kind of at the onset, and in the first 6 months, just because you need more reminders, or at least we feel like they end up needing more reminders because they come with questions that maybe sometimes give us a little bit of pause. And that's fine and that's normal, but we are going to be trying to move to more of a platform where people can do web-based HIPAA trainings on, not just on their time, but kind of in between patient care and administrative responsibilities. But we actively do HIPAA trainings now. And so some of the ways that we'll do that is, we, in the past year, implemented something called Break Glass in ECW, and we offer psychiatry and therapy services here. And as some of our frequent flyer or patients who really know some of the staff on a personal level because their kids go to school and things like that, we found that we needed to protect patient charts a little bit differently. While we believe and trust all of our employees, we still have this obligation to our patients and some of our staff's children to make sure we have the highest level of security with some of the information that's in the patient's chart. So we activated something called Break Glass, which can basically allow us to almost lock down a patient chart from the progress note section, and then only the designated authorized users are allowed to access that chart. Anybody can still schedule and do things like that, but it protects the guts of the chart. And then when we activated that, we put out a protocol to our staff. We held a meeting about it. We talked about why we were doing it and how we were doing it, and really how it was being monitored. That's important. We wanted them to know exactly how we could see who was accessing what, and what that looked like, and then what repercussions would look like if we found something like that. And then training there are some people in our office, providers, we had to do separate training with them so that they can activate a chart as Break Glass if they were the first person to identify something. And then, of course, inform me or inform the privacy officer. So we've done trainings like that, and then we documented it. We documented exactly what we did in terms of the protocol, and then we had everybody sign a sheet acknowledging that they understand the nature of this policy and this practice protocol and patient privacy. And then for that one, because it's kind of a big deal, and mental health services are really highly protected, I put a signed copy in everybody's employee file. Because if people are snooping around in things they shouldn't be, I find that to be an egregious violation. So I do measures like that where I really determine what's kind of general HIPAA stuff like, hey, make sure you're double verifying patient identity, and I want everybody to do a single sign-on sheet. And what is some stuff that I want people to know, like, I'm serious about everything, but I'm putting this in your file as an individual. You understand this policy. You're telling me back that you understand this policy and that you are always going to abide by this. If someone were to break the policy, they intentionally did it with the way it's set up. So I have different levels like that I utilize to kind of go through it. Frankly, scanning all those signed sheets is a chore to put in each person's file. So I manage it, and I have an entire HIPAA file that if something were to ever happen again, I have it broken down by year, and I could literally pull everything that I provided to my staff that I had signed, and how we worked on HIPAA in that year.
Great. So I think we've taught, going on to the next category of physical safeguards, I think we've talked a little bit about some of these. Obviously, the data watch card for your employees and making sure that you get that back in termination. Do you guys currently have a list of keys and data watch cards, as one continuous list for who has what type of access?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the big ones that we see. The reason I asked it that way, sorry to put you on the spot. But
No, it's totally fine. I don't have that. I know a lot of things in my head, but do I have them written down? If I got into a car accident, would anybody else know those things? No.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way we have to think in this is make sure that the whole practice knows what's going on, make sure that this list is somewhere. As I've been involved, this is one of the ones that I commonly see missing, and it's pretty straightforward stated in the rules and regulations. So, and it's actually a pretty easy one too. If you said I can make a list and get all the access cards, and if I get 99% of it, then at least I've got a good starting point. Some of the other stuff that we talked about, and this is part project that's ongoing with Potomac Pediatrics, is what we're doing to all the local machines, and that's another big one. Jenna, could you describe kind of how you were using the machines before in terms of accessing ECW and all of that?
Oh yeah, terribly. Previously we just had ECW, which is our EMR system, loaded onto our desktops, and we would just access it from the desktops. And my staff and providers loathe logging in. I mean, loathe it. And they were minimizing the screen so that it just showed a blank desktop, thinking that that was adequate. And then there'd be like 5 different people logged into each computer, between the nurse, the receptionist, because we do check-in in our exam rooms, and the doctor, and then if somebody else happened to pop in that room, right, because they had to borrow a room or needed an overflow room. And so at the end of the night, you've got 5 or 6 logins on the computer. It often froze our computers, and difficult to shut them down because an individual person's ECW could get locked out. A lot of reasons, but that's how they were managing it. And then a year and a half ago, I was like frustrated by this, and so we moved to the cloud system with Comtech, and now they have to log in, but they can just kind of bop around to any computer, and every time they log in, it puts them exactly where they were before, and that's been really, really helpful. I'm in the process now of getting ECW removed from all the desktops, because there are still people that will avoid using the cloud and go back to their old ways of going on the desktop, leaving themselves logged in, and just minimizing. And then they walk out of the room, patient's still in there. And that's absolutely not HIPAA compliant. So we have a new system and a new process that does work really well when you use it. And so now what I'm finding is that I need to remove the old way of doing things, because some people are just really adverse to change, and after a year and a half, I feel like we can just kind of push them off the cliff and make them jump with us. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
Yeah, and you're going to find that everywhere. I mean, the complacency or the resistance to change is 99% of the reason why, a lot of these things happen, or maybe not violations, but things that could easily turn into that. And like you said, the patients are left in the room, so if they didn't properly lock the computer, you could get in there. If somebody was, able, I don't want to say somebody was able to like maybe break into the practice. I'm struggling to think of a proper example, but the exam rooms don't stay locked, if I remember correctly, right? They're open. So the computer.
Correct. Our exam rooms do not have locks on the doors.
Right. So the computer needs to be properly secured in the in-between time too, when somebody's not there actively watching it. So that's part of the thing that we're working on. Eventually, what we're going to do, just for a quick technical explanation, is get all of the machines joined to a domain so that there's a centralized control of the policies. So when does the computer automatically log off? How long does the screen stay idle before it locks itself? Those kinds of things. And so that we can centrally manage passwords, which is one of the key tenets there in HIPAA, is that you have a way centrally to manage and maintain all of your logins in all the different infrastructures. So not only ECW, not just the cloud, but also the physical computers too. So it's tough to catch all of those all at once. So it's a process. All right, so let's talk about technical safeguards. And actually what we were just talking about, I think, goes right into that. So the last part of that we haven't talked about was, and actually, Jen, I wanted to ask you for a little clarification on this. I know you guys had some kind of standardized forms for the practice and things like that saved on the desktop so that your providers could get to them. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
we have. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
We have so on our shared drives, which I don't know if that's the technical term, but like our network drive, our providers have like referral forms and handouts and things that they like to keep easily available on the desktop. And prior to kind of getting some of these things kind of all linked together, we had to kind of manually go around to all the computers and exam rooms to do this. And now it just links. And so regardless of where our providers are shifting or going, or frankly, even if they just pull out a laptop, whether it's their personal laptop or ours, they're able to access the exact same files no matter where they go. And that has really, really been helpful, because prior to that, we would sometimes lose like the files, or they would no longer be on the desktop, or somebody clicked something and did something. But now we have everything kind of in a central location, but it's the way we're doing it now, we do it through the cloud system, so it's protected. The way we were doing it before, it was just on our on individual desktops that we were manually doing, and none of it was protected, especially given that I just told you how the providers would just like minimize their EMR system and move on.
Right. Yeah. So the final step in the process we were starting to describe there is going to be, to clean or sanitize the desktop so that they really are just, machines on the network that are used to get to the cloud or to, whatever website that you might need. That way we can trust that each of those machines, even if a patient was saying, all right, let's see what I can find on this machine, it's squeaky clean and we don't have to worry about it, even if they found a way to do that somehow. So, it's a good example of making sure all of your bases are covered. The next one that we were going to talk about, Jenna, I think you mentioned this earlier, the front desk and the shared mailboxes.
Yeah, so we have, and we have this in multiple areas. So we have our front desk team has like our general, Potomac Pediatrics email address for general inquiries. Our advice nurses, they have a shared inbox because right, we're not going to put out an email address for every employee. That's that doesn't make sense from a cost savings perspective, and that's so confusing for patients. So we have our general mailboxes. And when we have it set up on their Outlooks, or they go to office365.com to log in, we obviously give them the login, which is the email, and then the password. And we have expectations for them to monitor these and respond to them. And this is kind of one of the ways that, one, we don't always know who's sending things if they forget to put their name. So that's a little bit, that's a workflow thing in our office we have to constantly keep working on. But also when someone leaves, this is an area I don't even remotely think about in changing those passwords, because really they don't need Outlook to get into these emails. You can just go to office365.com and log into the email and then really go ham on whatever harm you would like to cause, and nobody would know who it was, right? Like if we had a disgruntled employee, they could absolutely log in and do something like that. And we would maybe suspect, and we would come to that, but we would never know, and we would never have proof of it. So that's an area that we are working on getting better at, and working with Comtech to come up with a viable solution that doesn't force us to create a bunch of emails or spend a ton of money just so that they all can use the same email box. So we're working with them to come up with creative solutions that meet our budget and our goals.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because, and one of the other things just procedural wise that we haven't quite touched on is when you have a full shared mailbox, you can see the current activity in that mailbox with all of the users. It's not like a distribution group where you get a copy of the email and it's up to you, to figure out what happened with it. When you're sharing the mailbox, you can see, oh, these were read, these are unread, I know what I have to work on. So it's a powerful tool, but there are some weak points. And we've started to talk about, how exactly we want to lock those down. Multi-factor authentication, which is kind of a confusing term, but everybody's kind of familiar with it. It means I'm entering a password to identify myself, and I'm also providing something else. So that could be an app on your cell phone, a text code, whatever the service might be. That might be the answer to do it. The other one may be locking down access via IP address. So in other words, you can only get to these from the cloud. And if we can shut down cloud access, then we've closed that gap. But again, it's ongoing, and it is a very difficult one to try to figure out because it's so pervasive. And then the last one was, as we were talking, was a good point that I had not thought of, even with my involvement in HIPAA so far. Jen and I were discussing customer portals and how those store and display information and what you have to look out for on those. That was kind of an eye-opening one.
Yeah, this is something that over the past year we've been navigating and putting systems in place. And I don't know how many people on this line are pediatricians or have dynamic situations where a child is taking care of a parent, and maybe it's a tense relationship. But what we've run into is that as children get older, they become of age to own their own medical information, and some of this actually happens at 13, some of it happens at 18. It kind of depends on what we're talking about. And so, especially when you're talking about like reproductivity rights and things like that. So we've been working towards a system, and ECW now has this, which is great, but it's not perfect. So it requires us to do a little bit of work where we are able to ensure that our patient, the child has, when at an appropriate age, has their patient portal login, and then the parent has a patient portal login. And to set measures for the appropriate age group. And then we have a process in place that at 18, the patient needs to sign a new authorization, either giving their parents access and at what level they want to give them access, or revoking the access. Sometimes they do actually revoke it because they want to be able to message the doctor without their parent knowing. And that's fine, that's their right. But we have found that patient portals are not actually always as HIPAA compliant based on age, at least in peds, as they could and should be. they're definitely getting better and more user-friendly in some of those aspects, but that has been a really, really challenging process for us to navigate. The updates that ECW specifically has made it easier for us in terms of having divorced parents, because we can give them each separate logins because they can't share. And not because, I don't say that because they couldn't we didn't allow them to share, but they physically don't get along to share. So that was a problem. But those kinds of things have really, we weren't aware of all the laws until sometimes a patient brings something up or something happens and a doctor will come and say, oh, what should I do? Should I put this in the chart? I want to get this lab, but is it going to go to their patient portal? They don't want their parent to know that they're having this STD testing. Okay, well, if all labs post to the portal, how do I stop the parent from getting the notification about this STD testing? I can't do anything about what they'll see on their EOB, but I do have a responsibility to protect the information that the patient has chosen not to share with their parents. So those kinds of things have come up a lot, and so we've been working on that aspect of it. But those again are they're HIPAA things that we all kind of maybe know the rules about, but technology doesn't always work in our favor to manage that aspect. But that's a really, really, really challenging one in our practice. We're doing something with it. It's not perfect. It could be better. We really need ECW's help to make it even better. But we have policies in place, and we explain them to the parents, and we explain them to the patients. So we're certainly better from where we were 2 years ago. And next year, I know we'll be even better than where we are now, because our processes will be seamless compared to how much we kind of struggle to navigate some of it right now.
Yeah, and it's a great example of where sometimes you think ECW or Athena or I forget the other major one, NextGen, all of those big medical records companies have everything figured out because that's their job. And sometimes, depending on how you use their product, you've got to change the way that you behave using the product to make sure that you're not liable. And that's a great example of where you still got to be careful. They don't have everything perfect. It's always a work in progress. So the last thing, I think we didn't have it mentioned on here, but the last thing that we wanted to talk about, obviously because this is a project that we've been working on and a partnership between Potomac Pediatrics and Comtech, is to remind everybody about business associate contracts. So that would be, and everyone is probably familiar with them, but we've found that having that signed contract between those people who need to see your copies of medical records and who might be exposed to them, there's two different types, are really important to have there. And sometimes they're left by the wayside because you get so busy. But just a reminder to those who are participating to go back and check on those things and make sure you've got a current updated copy. I don't recall, Jenna, you might know off the top of your head if it's supposed to be yearly. That's the ideal.
It is supposed to be annually. We definitely do not stay on top of, especially for vendors and groups that we work with, like Comtech. You guys are in and out of here often enough that I don't even think about it. It's like you guys almost you just belong here. And so we have vendors like that we don't even think about doing these with. When we have somebody new, we think about it, and it's part of our process for starting to work with somebody. But when we have people that we are consistently working with on an ongoing basis, we just do things that business as usual. It really would be something we had to think about.
Yeah, and that's a good quick way to get started too. If you said, all right, what are all my vendors that I need to worry about this with? Let's just get a new copy out to them right now. And it's a great way to get started. So Mel, I was just going to check in with you and see if we had any questions so far in the presentation.
No, it's been quiet.
Okay.
I would say that the business associate contract, one of the things to keep in mind is as your relationship with your vendors can change over time, that's another reason to update that document, in the interim, as like, for example, way back when we were just a phone company and now we're doing computers, but if we still had just a phone company contract, then maybe that's not what's needed.
Yeah, great example. So if there are no other questions or anything like that, I think we'll go ahead and end here. I want to thank Jenna again for presenting with us and working with us, in this process. She's been instrumental in helping us, hone our knowledge and to be able to bring this to other companies. So for those of you who are in the webinar, we'll be sending a thank you email with a copy of the recorded webinar so you can refer back to it. You feel free to send it to anybody else that you feel might have missed it or could benefit from it. And then please feel free to reach out to us. Again, we can do this process with your company and just kind of run through, try to find weak points, try to find those things that are missing, provide documentation for you, and try to help you cover all those bases. So thank you again for your time. Thank you again, Jenna and Mel, for helping out, and we'll see you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.